Hello, everyone. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Today's guest is Sara B. Sara is an EOS implementer with a particular focus on family-owned business. And you know, because you're probably in one, the unique dynamics of a family-owned business, how to lead it, how to set the vision for it, how to keep it sane on Thanksgiving. That and more as we begin our interview with Sara right now. Well, welcome, Sara, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Sara, we're actually very interested in having you because of the topics you cover. But as I always like to do at the top of the show, I'd love for you to just describe who you serve and what you do for them.
Oh, great. Sure. So my ideal client, the people who probably enjoy working with me the most, and I enjoy working with them, are family-owned companies. The ideal ones for me have probably between 10 and 250 employees. They want to grow the business and they're feeling some pain, whether it's in running the business or they're trying to figure out who should run the business day to day in a next generation. How do we transition it from one generation to the next?
Wow, so that's an area that I'd love to spend some time digging into, just the whole dynamic of a family-owned business, right? So why is a family-owned business not just, it's a business like any other business? What makes that different? And what are some of the things that if somebody listening to this right now say, well, I'm in a family, I own the family-owned business.
Yeah.
What should I be looking out for? What are some just top level things that come to mind as to what makes it different?
Thanks for asking that question, because it's incredible how many family businesses there are who don't think of themselves as a family business. So what makes it special is there are people involved who are, of course, obviously members of the family. They're also working in the business or considering working in the business. And then the third thing that makes a family run business, and that dynamic really interesting to me anyway, is there's ownership. So there's members of the family who may or may not be working in the business, but then there's also the question of ownership. Will the next generation own it? Does the next generation own it? What does it look like to either give or sell this business to members of the family? And then, of course, all the incredible dynamics that are included in that. And, I love, like I said, working with companies with 10 to 250 employees, but there's also huge family businesses out there. And then also really tiny ones that people may think of as, a mom and pop shop.
Right. So if we concentrate on that 10 to 250, kind of your classic SMB category business, right? So maybe it's old line manufacturing, industrial services, like that kind of business. You laid out a dichotomy between operationally being involved in a business and owning the business.
Yes.
So when there's a separation there, like let's say you have family members who own shares in the business, but who aren't necessarily in the business contributing to the business, does that create a particular stressor? Is that like, let's say it's handed down over generations.
Yeah.
So the sister decided or the brother, I don't want to be in that business. I'm going to be a doctor, but I don't want to give up my shares just yet. How does that get resolved?
Oh my gosh, it's such good stuff. And that happens, right? This happens every day. There's an owner, or there might even be an owner who, maybe they don't want to be a doctor, but what they want to be is a project manager. They don't want to run the business day to day. They don't want to be in there. So, and both of those create a certain dynamic. The way it gets resolved, from my perspective, is really treating the ownership group as a separate decision-making group, right? So there's a leadership group who runs the business, and they typically meet a lot. It's often that the ownership groups don't think of themselves that way. Like, we are the ownership group. We need to be organized. We need to be structured. We need to meet together. We need to have a way of making decisions. And so I love getting those people in the room to get really, really clear on, what are the values we hold for the business as owners? What are we trying to accomplish in 10 years? What's the legacy that we're trying to build? And then, of course, some more strategic things like, where do we as an ownership group want to be in 3 years? What's our ownership philosophy? Where do we want to be in a year? And then what are we doing more short term? Every 90 days, getting those owners, whether they're a project manager, the CEO, a doctor, a teacher, first generation, second, third, fourth generation in a business, getting them together to answer those questions is so powerful, because then that dynamic of maybe fighting for myself, or I'm only fighting for our employees, or I'm only fighting for this, or I'm only fighting for that, they start to fight for what they want for the legacy of the business and the legacy of the family.
Hey, pardon the interruption. It'll just be a beat. We want to tell you about something that's really exciting, and it might be very exciting to you if you're the owner, CEO, leader of a B2B company, roughly with $2 to $20 million in revenue, and you feel a little bit stuck. You know what I mean? Sales are a little flat, maybe even declining, challenged. Margins are being squeezed. Sales cycles seem to be lengthening, and lead flow is uncertain. We've designed a program based on over a dozen years of us doing exactly this for many B2B companies. It's called the Competitive Edge Program. And you can learn more about it at valueprop.com/edge. Tells you all about the program. It's a 90-day program, really focused on helping you sharpen your value proposition, aligning your value delivery, making sure your marketing program is doing what it has to do if you're in B2B, which is generate opportunities, and make sure your sales process is tight so that you can convert those opportunities into sales. So with that note, let's get back to another exciting episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. So what's interesting in those examples you gave of things they can work on, that ownership team, it was interesting that it didn't include whether or not we hire that receptionist or whether or not we hire that new machinist. So you made a distinction between ownership, which is kind of like acting like a board.
Yes.
And leadership, which is the day-to-day. So how often do those wires get crossed?
Oh my gosh. So without structures and without agreements, those wires are crossed left and right every day in family businesses all over the world, which, by the way, I'm just always compelled to say this. Family business is the most common type of family business there is in the world today and throughout history. I mean, if you want to get really wild, there's family businesses in the Old Testament, right? So this is an old business model. This is the original business model. So
the OG business
yes,
model.
exactly. That's exactly what it is, right? So and of course, family businesses get more credit, in the news or in reality TV for not doing this well, but there's tons of them who do it really well. But yes, that particular thing can get crossed, right? I'm the owner. I get to decide who's the receptionist. Well, yes, if you're the owner and you're the hiring manager for that role, you get to decide. But what really can make it clear is when there's a decision made and a clear differentiation of who's accountable for what. And I work with family businesses to help them with succession, although only a handful of them. Most of my other work is as an EOS implementer, and we use a really valuable tool called the accountability chart that says, what is each seat inside, so working in the business, what is each seat accountable for? And most of those seats, the owners are not accountable for, right? Owners are accountable to make sure there's a good visionary in that business. They might be accountable to make sure there's a good integrator in the business. But beyond that, the people running the business get to run the business day to day. And again, hire that receptionist or, the person who's making sure the bathrooms are clean. That's not the owner's problems. We don't want owners focusing there. It's a distraction for them. They need to be thinking about those big picture things like, what's our appetite for risk? What do we want out of this business? Where are we going? What are we willing to invest or reinvest in it?
Well, so what's interesting about that is the owner doesn't necessarily have to be the COO.
Right.
Or the CEO for that matter.
Yep.
But, there was, I forget, it's a famous quote about the vice president being the least powerful position because they actually don't have, and that's not a particular comment to today. I'm just saying, generally speaking, it's always seen as, you're the spare part, right? Literally, that's your role. So that's sometimes how when I've talked to executives who come into a family-owned business, a family-run business, they kind of feel like that spare part, regardless of what they were told their charter was going to be. So how do you help owners or an ownership team really welcome top talent, especially when you start scaling? Like, it's one thing when it's just 10 of us, but now we're a 100-person company. It's a different skill set to run a 100-person business than a 10-person business. And I may need to go out and hire that person, but I have to persuade them they're going to have real authority.
Yes.
So is that accountability chart enough to get that done? Or is there some other mind shift that has to take place for that to work?
Well, I would say, yes, the accountability chart is the key tool for that. because it creates a mind shift, if that makes sense, right?
Okay.
So saying this is what we're accountable to starts to create that mind shift of, okay, I'm the owner. I've hired this person to do X, Y, Z. I've not hired myself. I don't get to micromanage that, that kind of thing. But there's another really valuable tool that when paired up, I think together create that incredible mind shift. And that's, we call it a VTO, or a vision traction organizer. And that is a 2-page document that has clarity about the core values, the core focus, the 10-year target of the business, who's our ideal client, where are we going to be in 3 years and in 1 year and in 90 days. So kind of similar questions to what I was talking about, the ownership needs to understand for
Sure.
themselves. But when the ownership and when this incoming leadership non-family member are absolutely committed to what that document says, I think that, and then who's accountable to make that happen, that creates that massive mind shift around, okay, this is what I have accountability for as an owner. This is what this non-family member has accountability for in the day-to-day. Very simple things, not always easy to pull off, but incredibly powerful for making day-to-day decision making, not be fraught with chaos, infighting, dysfunction, but making day-to-day decision making, while it's often hard, have clarity, accountability, and opportunities to just be open and honest about what's going on.
And I've actually seen that principle work when things are going well.
Yeah.
They work less well, generally, I've seen, when things are like rocky. If you hit a rough patch, all of a sudden there's like this desire, like if only I were still in the driver's seat.
Right. Yes. Yes.
In my day, this is how we used to do it. And, after all, right. And that may have been 30 years ago where, that's a different day. I mean, principles are principles, but there's a lot that's changed.
Yeah.
So one thing that's a real challenge for a family-owned business is obviously this idea of succession, right? So the original owners, maybe it was 2 brothers or a family that, but they're like in their 60s now, and they're thinking, okay, the horizon's there and I'd like to not work so hard, and have all these kids, their cousins, their whatever. How does that transition happen without making Thanksgiving an incredibly uncomfortable holiday?
So I want to respond to 2 things, so using that approach when things are going well is just so incredible, right? It just is crazy effective. I always say I really respect family businesses. I think of my clients on Thanksgiving morning, right? Because they were working together yesterday. They're sitting at the table today. The beautiful thing that I've seen with EOS is family businesses, and that's the entrepreneurial operating system. That's the work that the system that I use, is when things are going well, we get used to solving issues, identifying issues, solving them. And then when things start to go badly, the good news is we're good at solving issues. And what's a bad day? It's just a whole bunch of issues in one day. What's a bad month? A whole bunch of issues in a month. What's a bad year? Same thing. Right. And so I've found that once my teams just get really good at solving issues, all things are an issue, and you can solve an issue on Wednesday and maybe still have some stuff hanging out and then sit down together on a Thursday. And while it's not comfortable, the key is during succession and during just the day-to-day running of the business is having a vision everyone's focused on that is about the good for the family and the good for the business. And when that vision is clear and everybody's agreed to it, things might not feel good. You might not like the check you got this quarter, but you've agreed that we're investing back in the business and therefore the check's going to be smaller, right? Things like that. So I think what happens is people stop focusing on their own needs or stop focusing on how terrible their brother or sister is and start focusing on, okay, this is what I want for the business. Doesn't make things always easier, but take some of that dysfunction and the toxic stuff out of the situation. Still hard, but not as toxic.
Right. So you have to have real buy-in to the idea of that, right? Like we're going to be guided by a vision, by a plan, and then we're going to come together and agree on what that is. And that's what we're going to live by.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's the challenge, of course, is somebody's half paying attention. Say, sure, whatever, keep those dividends coming.
And then the rubber hits the road. Yes.
And there's always that, right?
Yep.
So one of the areas that I've seen rubber hitting road is when you have a next generation person being brought in to the firm that just isn't doing a great job.
Yes.
And everyone, and the owners don't know this, but when you interview the staff, you realize everybody knows this person is untouchable. It doesn't create great morale, right? It's actually a big negative because they realize,
Yes.
Joe can totally screw up, but he can never lose his job, and
Yep.
I'll never get that position.
Yep.
So how do you help an owner navigate that? Because there's a lot of things, like including Thanksgiving, and my sister's going to be there, and that's her son,
Yep.
and I can't do anything about Joe.
Yeah.
Can they do something about Joe?
Any client I work with has to be willing to do something about Joe. If they're not willing to do something about Joe, they can't, I can't help them. Right. So it doesn't mean you fire Joe on day one. It doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. But the thing I like to ask clients to do is play out the situation. So let's stick with, my nephew, Joe. You keep Joe around. Everybody around him, morale goes down. Oh my gosh, right now, good people can get a different job somewhere else tomorrow if they want, right? So you're going to start losing those people. And sure, things might not feel uncomfortable this Thanksgiving, but a year from now, when all the dividend checks have gone down because we lost our best people, everybody's uncomfortable now, right? It's not just me and Joe and his mom, but the whole family is uncomfortable. So I'd like to help people let's play this out. Do we really want to leave Joe there and take on this massive amount of risk for the company? And sometimes the answer is yes. And then I say, great, you just keep doing that. Don't pay me.
Right.
That's your business model. That's the way you're going to do it. If that's what you want, fine. For me, I've seen way too many businesses fail because of that, or way too many families fail because of that. And quite frankly, for me, it's the heartbreaker to me when the family fails. So I like to say, run a healthy business, you're going to have a healthy family. Run a healthy family, you're going to run a healthy business, right? So it's have the hard conversation about Joe instead of a year or two or three having a hard conversation about why the business hasn't been profitable.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes when I've reached that impasse with clients, I call it out this way. I say, well, that's your owner privilege.
Yeah.
And I just couch it as,
yeah.
And they go, what do you mean by that? I said, well, you're the owner. You can pretty much, whether it makes sense for your business or not, you can certainly do it.
Yep.
If you're willing to pay the cost of that, and that's up to you. And when you couch it like that, they go like, well, I don't want to be the guy or the gal who's doing things because of owner privilege. I want to do it because
that's so good. I love that. It's a great approach. The other thing I'll do is say, okay, so you're going to keep Joe. So what are the issues you have to solve? Morale on the team, losing good employees. Joe's on the sales team. Okay, so you're going to lose your best salespeople. So who are you going to lay up? Right? It's just like, well, what are the issues you're going to have to solve because of it? And they say, oh, well, that looks not very fun. I'll just have the conversation with Joe.
Yeah. Right. And sometimes it may be also, there's always the classic split, right, between skill and will.
Yeah.
Joe doesn't want to be better, or Joe's never been trained, has never been taught how to do it. So maybe Joe's a good egg. If only we could work on building up his skills. So then that's a question there.
Yep.
Wow. So, when we look at this family business, one of the biggest, and probably I'll just kind of land on this for this conversation here, Sarah. And thank you. This has been really great.
This is really fun
stuff to talk about. So succession, the whole idea of we might one day sell this business, right? So a lot of owners have an inflated view, as you know, of what their business might be worth, usually driven by what they think they need at some point in time.
Yep.
And they think it's like just taking a withdrawal from the bank.
Yeah.
Right now, owners generally in the last 10 years have become a lot more aware that that's not quite so. But just what are some of the things, somebody listening to this saying, well, I may want to get out of this thing in 3-4 years. What should they be thinking about doing now to kind of prepare that ramp for them so they actually have some options?
Great question. I had this conversation yesterday with 2 owners. And one of the key things that I always say is if you're running the heck out of the day-to-day, the value of your business is just going to be less. Who wants to buy a business from people who are going to take a big check and maybe not be around? So that's the first thing I say is get your accountability chart clear, especially for the leadership, and get a great team in there. There's much more value in them really than there is having an owner in that seat. And that is not a fun thing for anybody to hear. At least I've never met anybody who thought that was a fun thing to hear, but I'd say that's one of the biggest things. Two is getting really, really focused on your niche and what are you absolutely best at. I just think businesses are so much more value when you're not everything to everyone, when you're not trying to still run your grandpa or your grandma's business model, but you're running the business model for today. And I should actually say you're running the business model for the future, not the past and not for today. So those are the two biggest things, like have a really solid strategy focused on what's coming in your industry and where you can really fit. And then two is actually start getting yourself out of the day-to-day, get a great leadership team. They're more valuable than you are. Sad but true, they are. So
well, because you're not going to be, the whole point is just you're exiting.
You're selling it, right? Yeah,
selling
you've got money in your pocket. At some point, you don't want to come there every day, and the new
Right.
owners probably don't want the former owners there. I mean, it's like you don't marry a guy when his ex-wife is still living in the house. That's not comfortable. You don't want to sign up for that.
Just saying, right?
Yeah, as an example, right? That's not a fun thing. The price of the value of your business is less when you're the ex-wife who's still in the house. You got to get a great team there. And then you'll see the value or more value for sure.
Wow, fantastic. Well, Sara, thank you so much for sharing.
This is great.
For our listeners. So if somebody listening says, well, Sara sounds like she's really dialed in on this. I'd like to learn more about her work. I'd like to possibly contact her. Where should they go?
Yeah. So hopefully this is easy. I listen to all my podcasts when I'm driving. I love the fact that my name is a sentence. I am Sara B. Stern. I'm not good at being stern, but that is my name. So look for me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me. All my contact and all my connections are there. So Sara B. Stern, and it's Sara with no H.
Okay, fantastic, Sara. Thank you so much. And thanks again for sharing with our Revenue Throughput podcast guest.
Oh, thanks for having me. I hope this was helpful for people.
All right. Oh, absolutely. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of the Revenue Throughput podcast. If you like this episode and if you like the series, make sure you subscribe below. And also, if you liked it, please do review it. When people are looking for something exciting to listen to, especially the kind of content we're bringing, which is practical insights for B2B companies, this is a place and a free resource that they can take advantage of. Let them know about it with your review. So subscribe, review, enjoy. Thanks again.